The first indication of irregularity appeared in the monthly census reports submitted to the Kansas State Board of Health during February 1936. Dr. Harrison Whitmore, the newly appointed superintendent of the Kansas State Hospital, had discovered discrepancies while reviewing patient records inherited from his predecessor. The numbers simply did not align with the physical count of individuals housed within the institution's secured wings. 3 patients, all long-term residents of Ward 7, had seemingly vanished from official documentation without corresponding discharge papers, transfer orders, or death certificates. The administrative void left behind was as complete as if these individuals had never existed within the hospital's walls. Ward 7 housed the institution's most challenging cases, those deemed too unstable for integration into the general population. The wing operated under strict protocols established by the State Medical Board, requiring dual authorization for any patient movement and maintaining continuous surveillance by trained attendants. Security measures included reinforced doors with multiple locking mechanisms, barred windows, and a single controlled access point monitored around the clock. The physical impossibility of unauthorized departure made the missing documentation all the more perplexing to Dr. Whitmore, who had built his career on methodical record-keeping and institutional accountability. The 3 individuals in question had been committed to the facility under varying circumstances spanning the previous decade. Patient records indicated diagnoses ranging from acute melancholia to what contemporary medical terminology classified as dementia praecox. Each had demonstrated periods of violent agitation requiring physical restraint, followed by extended phases of catatonic withdrawal that necessitated constant medical supervision. Their prolonged institutionalization had established predictable patterns of behavior that made sudden disappearance particularly unlikely, according to the attending physicians who had monitored their conditions over multiple years. Dr. Whitmore's investigation began with interviews of Ward 7 staff, including night attendants who maintained continuous observation during evening hours. Personnel reports revealed nothing unusual in the weeks preceding the discovery of missing documentation, with routine entries noting standard meal distributions, medication administration, and behavioral observations. The mechanical precision of institutional life had continued uninterrupted, creating an administrative paradox where 3 human beings had somehow ceased to exist within a system designed to account for every moment of their existence. Night shift supervisor Margaret Henley provided detailed testimony confirming that bed checks had been completed according to protocol, with no empty quarters noted during her tenure. The hospital's chief administrator, Edwin Morse, had served the institution for over 2 decades and prided himself on maintaining immaculate records that had passed multiple state inspections without incident. His personal review of the filing systems revealed gaps that defied logical explanation, as if entire sections of documentation had been surgically removed without disturbing surrounding materials. The absence of any indication of tampering or unauthorized access to secured record storage areas deepened the mystery surrounding the administrative anomaly. Morse's reputation for institutional efficiency made his inability to explain the missing documentation particularly troubling to state oversight authorities. Physical inspection of Ward 7 revealed no structural anomalies that might explain unauthorized departure from the secured facility. Windows remained intact with original iron fixtures, showing no signs of tampering or forced entry attempts. Door mechanisms functioned properly, with locks engaging according to manufacturer specifications, while walls and flooring displayed the normal wear patterns expected in a decades-old medical facility. The absence of any physical evidence supporting theories of escape or unauthorized removal left investigators with an increasingly narrow range of possible explanations for the mysterious disappearances. State Medical Board representatives arrived to conduct formal interviews with hospital personnel, focusing particular attention on staff members with access to both patient quarters and administrative records. The investigation proceeded with bureaucratic thoroughness, examining duty rosters, key distribution logs, and personal backgrounds of individuals with authorization to enter restricted areas. Despite extensive questioning and document review, investigators found no evidence of misconduct, negligence, or conspiracy among hospital staff members. The integrity of institutional procedures appeared uncompromised, leaving the mystery of the missing patients without clear resolution. Dr. Whitmore concluded his preliminary report by requesting additional time to conduct a comprehensive review of all patient records dating back 5 years, hoping to identify patterns or anomalies that might explain the current situation. His methodical approach reflected both scientific training and growing concern about the implications of unexplained disappearances from a secured medical facility. The superintendent's commitment to transparency with state authorities demonstrated his determination to maintain public confidence in institutional security while acknowledging the serious nature of the administrative crisis facing the Kansas State Hospital. The mystery would require deeper investigation to restore accountability and ensure the safety of remaining patients under state care. Dr. Whitmore's expanded investigation into historical patient records revealed a disturbing pattern that had previously escaped administrative attention. Document analysis spanning the previous 5 years indicated 7 additional cases of patients who had seemingly vanished from official records without corresponding paperwork to explain their departure from the facility. The disappearances occurred at irregular intervals, with gaps of several months between incidents, creating a timeline that suggested systematic rather than random occurrences. Each case involved long-term patients housed in high-security wards, individuals whose extended institutionalization had made them virtually invisible to outside scrutiny or family inquiry. The missing patients shared common characteristics that became apparent through careful review of their admission documentation and medical histories. All had been committed to the facility following episodes of severe psychological disturbance that had resulted in complete social isolation prior to institutionalization. Family connections had either been severed through formal legal proceedings or had naturally deteriorated during extended periods of confinement, leaving these individuals without external advocates to monitor their welfare. Their cases represented the institution's most forgotten residents, people whose disappearance might go unnoticed indefinitely without administrative investigation. Night attendant testimony revealed subtle inconsistencies in routine observations that had been dismissed as clerical errors at the time of their occurrence. Several staff members recalled instances of confusion regarding bed counts during evening rounds, with temporary discrepancies that were later attributed to patient movement between quarters for medical procedures. The pattern of minor administrative confusion had been rationalized through institutional protocols that prioritized patient care over precise documentation, creating an environment where systematic record manipulation might proceed undetected. Retrospective analysis suggested that these apparent clerical errors may have provided cover for more deliberate actions. Ward Supervisor Margaret Henley provided additional testimony regarding subtle changes in institutional routines that had been implemented gradually over the previous year. New procedures for patient transfer between wards had been introduced by the previous administration, requiring modified documentation protocols that created temporary gaps in record-keeping continuity. The transitional period had generated confusion among staff members who struggled to adapt established practices to evolving administrative requirements. These procedural changes coincided temporally with several of the documented disappearances, suggesting possible exploitation of institutional uncertainty to facilitate unauthorized patient removal. Medical staff interviews revealed growing concern about the psychological impact of the investigation on remaining patients in Ward 7. Several individuals had exhibited increased agitation and sleep disturbances following the arrival of state investigators, requiring modifications to medication regimens to maintain institutional stability. The heightened security measures implemented in response to the missing patient crisis had created an atmosphere of tension that affected both staff morale and patient behavior. Dr. Zara Chen, the ward's primary physician, reported that the investigation itself had become a source of institutional trauma, requiring careful management to prevent further psychological deterioration among vulnerable individuals. Administrative records from the previous superintendent's tenure revealed policy changes that had gradually reduced external oversight of patient welfare within high-security wards. Budget constraints had necessitated reductions in state inspection frequency, while modified reporting requirements had simplified documentation protocols in ways that might have obscured irregular patient movements. The institutional isolation that protected vulnerable individuals from public scrutiny had inadvertently created conditions where unauthorized activities might proceed without detection. These policy modifications had been implemented with legitimate intentions to improve operational efficiency while maintaining appropriate patient care standards. The Kansas State Medical Board's formal investigation expanded to include review of personnel files for all staff members with access to Ward 7 during the time frame of documented disappearances. Background checks revealed no criminal activity or prior misconduct among current employees, while psychological evaluations conducted during the hiring process had identified no concerning behavioral patterns. The institutional screening procedures appeared adequate to prevent employment of individuals with malicious intentions toward vulnerable patients. Despite thorough personnel review, investigators found no evidence linking staff members to the mysterious disappearances plaguing the facility. Dr. Whitmore's comprehensive analysis concluded that the pattern of disappearances suggested sophisticated knowledge of institutional procedures combined with systematic exploitation of administrative vulnerabilities. The methodical nature of the incidents indicated planning and coordination that extended beyond opportunistic criminal activity or individual misconduct. The superintendent's report recommended immediate implementation of enhanced security protocols and modified record-keeping procedures to prevent future occurrences while acknowledging that the existing mystery remained unresolved. The investigation had revealed the scope of the problem while providing few answers about the mechanisms or motivations behind the systematic disappearance of vulnerable patients from state care. Research into the tenure of Dr. Whitmore's predecessor revealed a complex administrative legacy that had shaped institutional practices during the period when most patient disappearances occurred. Dr. Cornelius Blackwood had served as superintendent for nearly 15 years before his unexpected resignation in late 1935, citing personal health concerns that required immediate attention. His departure had been abrupt, with minimal transition period provided for administrative handover, leaving incoming staff to decipher institutional procedures through fragmentary documentation and conflicting staff accounts. The hasty nature of his exit had created administrative chaos that persisted well into Dr. Whitmore's early tenure. Personnel records indicated that Dr. Blackwood had implemented numerous policy changes during his final years of service, many of which had reduced external oversight while centralizing administrative authority within the superintendent's office. These modifications had been justified through correspondence with state authorities as necessary efficiency measures designed to reduce bureaucratic redundancy and improve patient care coordination. The gradual concentration of administrative power had eliminated checks and balances that might have detected irregular patient movements or unauthorized alterations to official documentation. Staff members recalled increasing isolation of decision-making processes during Dr. Blackwood's later years as superintendent. Financial records from the Blackwood administration revealed irregularities in budget allocation that had gone unnoticed during routine state audits conducted with reduced frequency due to the facility's previously exemplary compliance record. Expenditures for patient care supplies had decreased significantly during periods coinciding with documented disappearances, suggesting reduced patient population that was not reflected in official census reports. The discrepancies indicated systematic manipulation of financial documentation designed to obscure actual patient numbers while maintaining state funding based on inflated population figures. These financial anomalies provided potential motivation for unauthorized patient removal from the facility. Dr. Blackwood's personal correspondence, recovered from his former office, contained references to experimental treatment protocols that had been implemented without formal approval from state medical authorities. His letters to colleagues at other institutions discussed innovative approaches to managing chronic psychiatric conditions through intensive intervention techniques that required complete isolation from external influences. The experimental nature of these treatments had necessitated modified documentation procedures to protect patient privacy while advancing medical knowledge through careful observation of treatment outcomes. The correspondence suggested that some patients may have been transferred to specialized treatment programs without standard administrative procedures. Staff members who had worked closely with Dr. Blackwood described personality changes during his final years that had concerned colleagues but had not been formally reported to administrative authorities. Previously collaborative leadership style had evolved into increasingly secretive behavior characterized by private meetings, restricted access to patient records, and dismissal of staff members who questioned new institutional procedures. Several employees recalled instances where Dr. Blackwood had personally handled patient transfers during evening hours, bypassing normal protocols that required multiple staff authorization. These behavioral changes had been attributed to work-related stress rather than recognizing potential warning signs of administrative misconduct. The medical library maintained by Dr. Blackwood contained extensive collections of research materials related to experimental psychiatric treatments that were considered controversial within mainstream medical practice. His personal notes revealed intense interest in isolation therapy techniques that involved complete separation of patients from familiar environments as a method of breaking through resistant psychological conditions. The theoretical framework underlying these experimental approaches suggested that dramatic environmental changes might produce breakthrough therapeutic results where conventional treatments had failed. However, implementation of such techniques without proper oversight raised serious ethical concerns about patient welfare and informed consent. Interviews with former colleagues revealed that Dr. Blackwood had maintained correspondence with private medical facilities that specialized in experimental psychiatric treatment programs not available within state institutional settings. These communications had discussed potential collaboration in advanced treatment protocols that might benefit patients who had not responded to conventional therapeutic approaches. The private facilities operated with greater autonomy than state institutions, allowing implementation of innovative techniques that required reduced external oversight and modified documentation procedures. Such collaborative arrangements might have provided legitimate pathways for patient transfer outside normal administrative channels. Dr. Whitmore's investigation into the previous administration concluded that Dr. Blackwood's tenure had created institutional conditions that could have facilitated unauthorized patient transfers through exploitation of experimental treatment protocols and reduced oversight procedures. While no direct evidence of criminal activity had been discovered, the pattern of administrative changes and policy modifications suggested systematic preparation for activities that required concealment from state authorities. The complex legacy of the Blackwood administration would require careful analysis to determine whether patient disappearances resulted from well-intentioned but improperly documented experimental treatments or more sinister forms of institutional misconduct that had exploited vulnerable individuals under state care. Ward 7's remaining patients exhibited behavioral changes that staff attributed to the unsettling atmosphere created by ongoing investigations and heightened security measures. Several long-term residents, who had previously maintained predictable routines, began displaying signs of increased agitation during evening hours, particularly in quarters previously occupied by the missing individuals. Their disturbances followed patterns that suggested awareness of absent companions, despite cognitive limitations that should have prevented recognition of such subtle environmental changes. Night attendants reported incidents of patients approaching empty beds and engaging in one-sided conversations as if responding to invisible presence. Mary Catherine Wells, a patient who had been institutionalized for over 8 years following a complete psychological breakdown, demonstrated the most pronounced reactions to the changed ward environment. Her previously catatonic state had given way to periods of lucid communication, where she made references to the quiet ones who went away without prompting from staff members. During supervised recreation periods, she would position herself near windows overlooking the hospital grounds and maintain vigil as if watching for returning figures. Her behavior suggested retained memories of fellow patients, despite medical assessments indicating severe cognitive impairment that should have prevented formation of such detailed recollections. The patient, known only as Thomas, whose surname had been lost due to incomplete admission documentation from the previous decade, began exhibiting compulsive behaviors centered around bed-making activities in quarters that housed missing individuals. Each morning, he would systematically arrange bedding in precise patterns that matched the personal preferences of absent patients, despite having shown no previous interest in domestic activities. His actions suggested detailed knowledge of individual habits and routines that staff members had not realized he possessed. When questioned about his behavior, Thomas would retreat into non-verbal states that made further communication impossible. Patient records indicated that several residents of Ward 7 had maintained informal social structures that provided emotional support within the institutional environment. The disappearance of certain individuals had disrupted these relationships in ways that affected remaining patients more profoundly than anticipated by medical staff. Dr. Chen observed that institutional life had created substitute family units among long-term residents, and the sudden absence of key figures had triggered grief responses similar to bereavement reactions in the general population. These emotional impacts suggested that patients retained greater capacity for interpersonal connection than their diagnoses had indicated. Staff members noted that remaining patients demonstrated knowledge of institutional routines and procedures that exceeded expectations based on their documented cognitive limitations. Several individuals had begun avoiding certain areas of the ward where missing patients had spent significant time, while others displayed anxiety responses when approached by staff members who had been closely associated with the disappeared individuals. Their behavior indicated awareness of complex social dynamics within the institutional environment that challenged medical assumptions about the extent of their psychological impairment. Such observations raise questions about the accuracy of diagnostic assessments used to justify long-term institutionalization. The most disturbing patient responses involved incidents where remaining residents appeared to be responding to auditory stimuli that staff members could not detect. Multiple individuals would simultaneously turn toward empty quarters, as if hearing voices or sounds emanating from unoccupied spaces. These episodes occurred with sufficient frequency to rule out coincidental behavior, suggesting shared sensory experiences that defied rational explanation. Night attendants reported instances where patients would gather near empty beds during evening hours and remain motionless for extended periods, as if participating in some form of silent communication. Physical symptoms among remaining patients included sleep disturbances, reduced appetite, and episodes of unexplained trembling that occurred without apparent medical cause. Medical examinations revealed no underlying health conditions that might explain these physical manifestations, leading Dr. Chen to theorize that patients were experiencing trauma responses to environmental changes beyond their ability to verbally express. The institutional environment that had previously provided stability and routine had become a source of psychological stress that affected vulnerable individuals in ways that conventional medical understanding struggled to address. Dr. Whitmore documented these patient responses as potential evidence relevant to understanding the circumstances surrounding the disappearances, while acknowledging the challenges inherent in interpreting behavior of individuals with limited communication abilities. The reactions of remaining patients suggested that they possessed important information about recent events within Ward 7, but their cognitive limitations made reliable testimony impossible to obtain. Their silent witness to mysterious occurrences provided tantalizing hints about the nature of the disappearances, while remaining frustratingly beyond the reach of conventional investigative methods. The behavioral evidence indicated that something significant had occurred within the ward, but the exact nature of those events remained locked within minds that could not effectively communicate their experiences to the outside world. Investigation into record-keeping procedures revealed systematic gaps in documentation that extended beyond simple clerical errors or administrative oversight. The missing patient files had been removed with surgical precision, leaving no trace of their existence while carefully preserving surrounding materials in ways that initially prevented detection of the deletions. Database entries, cross-referenced medical charts, and corresponding financial records had been eliminated through coordinated efforts that required intimate knowledge of institutional filing systems. The sophistication of the document removal process indicated involvement of individuals with comprehensive understanding of hospital administrative procedures. State archival requirements mandated retention of all patient records for minimum periods specified by medical board regulations, making the complete elimination of documentation a serious violation of legal protocols. The systematic nature of the deletions suggested advanced planning, designed to create permanent administrative voids that would prevent future investigation or accountability measures. Standard backup procedures that should have preserved duplicate records had been circumvented through methods that implied access to secure storage areas normally restricted to senior administrative personnel. The thoroughness of the record elimination process demonstrated detailed knowledge of institutional safeguards and systematic exploitation of security vulnerabilities. Financial audit trails revealed discrepancies between reported patient populations and actual care expenditures that had been concealed through creative accounting methods designed to avoid detection during routine state inspections. Budget allocations for food services, medical supplies, and staffing requirements had been gradually adjusted to reflect reduced patient numbers while maintaining official census figures that justified continued state funding. The financial manipulation required coordination between multiple administrative departments and suggested conspiracy among several staff members with access to budget documentation. These economic irregularities provided clear motivation for systematic patient removal while maintaining the appearance of normal institutional operations. Correspondence between the Kansas State Hospital and external medical facilities revealed unofficial arrangements for patient transfers that had been conducted outside normal regulatory channels. Letters recovered from Dr. Blackwood's files indicated ongoing communication with private institutions that offered specialized treatment programs not available within state facilities. These collaborative arrangements had been presented as beneficial opportunities for patients who might receive improved care through alternative therapeutic approaches. However, the lack of proper documentation for such transfers violated state oversight requirements and created administrative voids that prevented tracking of patient welfare after departure from state custody. Personnel interviews revealed a culture of administrative compartmentalization that had prevented staff members from obtaining complete information about institutional operations beyond their specific responsibilities. Employees reported that Dr. Blackwood had implemented need-to-know policies that restricted access to patient information and administrative procedures, ostensibly to protect patient privacy and improve operational efficiency. The compartmentalization had created an environment where individual staff members could not effectively monitor overall institutional activities or identify irregular patterns that might indicate systematic misconduct. This administrative structure had provided ideal conditions for concealing unauthorized activities from internal oversight. The hospital's communication systems had been modified during the previous administration to centralize information flow through the superintendent's office, eliminating direct contact between ward staff and external oversight authorities. Phone logs indicated that incoming calls from family members, legal representatives, or state officials had been systematically routed through administrative personnel who controlled access to patient information. This centralized communication system had created opportunities for filtering information and preventing external inquiries from reaching appropriate staff members who might have provided contradictory accounts of patient status. The communication modifications had effectively isolated the institution from external scrutiny while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. Legal analysis of patient commitment procedures revealed that many missing individuals had been institutionalized through emergency proceedings that created minimal external documentation and reduced family involvement in ongoing care decisions. These expedited commitment processes had been designed to provide rapid intervention during psychiatric crises, but had inadvertently created categories of patients with limited external advocacy or oversight. The legal isolation of these individuals had made them particularly vulnerable to unauthorized removal because their disappearance was unlikely to trigger immediate external investigation or legal action by family members or advocates. Dr. Whitmore's comprehensive review concluded that the administrative void surrounding the missing patients had been created through systematic exploitation of institutional policies and procedures designed to protect patient privacy and improve operational efficiency. The complex web of modified protocols, centralized authority, and compartmentalized information had created ideal conditions for concealing unauthorized activities while maintaining the appearance of legitimate medical operations. The investigation revealed that institutional safeguards intended to protect vulnerable patients had been transformed into mechanisms for exploitation through careful manipulation by individuals with comprehensive knowledge of hospital administrative systems. The administrative void would require fundamental restructuring of institutional procedures to prevent future exploitation while ensuring appropriate protection for patients under state care. Investigation into Dr. Blackwood's professional associations revealed extensive correspondence with a network of private medical facilities that operated outside conventional regulatory oversight established for state institutions. These facilities, located primarily in remote areas of neighboring states, specialized in experimental treatment programs that claim to offer breakthrough therapeutic approaches for chronic psychiatric conditions. The private institutions marketed their services to families and medical professionals seeking alternatives to traditional institutionalization, promising innovative techniques that might produce results where conventional treatments had failed. Their promotional materials emphasized complete environmental separation as essential for therapeutic breakthroughs. The Whitmore Institute, located in a secluded area of Missouri, appeared most frequently in Dr. Blackwood's correspondence and represented the most sophisticated of the experimental facilities. Promotional literature described comprehensive treatment programs that combined isolation therapy with innovative pharmaceutical interventions designed to break through resistant psychological conditions. The Institute's approach required complete separation from familiar environments and previous social connections to maximize therapeutic potential through intensive intervention techniques. Patient selection criteria emphasized individuals who had demonstrated minimal response to conventional treatments and possessed limited external support networks that might interfere with experimental protocols. Financial records indicated that Dr. Blackwood had received consulting fees from several private facilities for services described as patient evaluation and referral coordination. These payments had been processed through legitimate professional development accounts that did not require detailed reporting to state authorities, creating income streams that might have influenced his treatment recommendations. The consulting arrangements had been presented as beneficial collaborations that enhanced professional knowledge while providing additional resources for improving patient care within the state system. However, the financial incentives created potential conflicts of interest that might have influenced decisions regarding patient transfers to experimental programs. Communication logs revealed that representatives from private facilities had visited the Kansas State Hospital during evening hours when normal administrative oversight was reduced. These visits had been scheduled as informal professional consultations that did not require formal documentation or state approval, allowing discussion of experimental treatment approaches and patient selection criteria without regulatory interference. Staff members recalled instances where visiting consultants had toured high-security wards and interviewed selected patients as part of treatment evaluation processes. The informal nature of these consultations had prevented comprehensive documentation of discussions or patient assessments. Legal analysis revealed that private facilities operated under different regulatory frameworks that provided greater autonomy in treatment decisions while maintaining reduced external oversight compared to state institutions. Patient transfers to private facilities could be accomplished through family consent or emergency medical determinations that bypass normal state approval processes. The regulatory differences created opportunities for patient movement between systems without comprehensive documentation or continued state monitoring of treatment outcomes. Such transfers might have appeared legitimate while effectively removing individuals from state oversight and accountability measures. Professional licensing boards confirmed that Dr. Blackwood had maintained active credentials that authorized participation in experimental treatment programs and patient transfer decisions within established legal frameworks. His professional standing had provided credibility for recommendations regarding alternative treatment approaches, while his position as state institutions superintendent had given him access to patients who might benefit from experimental interventions. The combination of professional authority and institutional access had created ideal conditions for facilitating patient transfers to private facilities without arousing suspicion from oversight authorities or family members. Correspondence with families of missing patients revealed that several had received communications describing voluntary transfer opportunities to specialized treatment facilities that offered hope for conditions previously considered untreatable. These communications had emphasized potential therapeutic breakthroughs while minimizing detailed discussion of treatment methods or facility locations. Families desperate for solutions to chronic psychiatric conditions had agreed to transfers based on professional recommendations and promises of improved outcomes. The communications had been professionally presented and legally documented, creating legitimate appearances while potentially facilitating unauthorized patient removal. Investigation into the current status of private facilities mentioned in Dr. Blackwood's correspondence revealed that several had ceased operations or relocated during the period following his resignation from state service. Attempts to contact former staff members or obtain records from these facilities had been unsuccessful, with forwarding addresses leading to inactive locations or non-responsive contacts. The apparent dissolution of the experimental treatment network coincided temporally with investigation into missing patients, suggesting possible coordination between institutional activities and external operations. The disappearance of these private facilities created additional obstacles to determining the fate of transferred patients, while eliminating potential sources of information about unauthorized treatment programs. Federal authorities became involved in the investigation when evidence suggested possible interstate transportation of patients without proper legal documentation, elevating the matter from local administrative irregularities to potential federal crimes. Special Agent Robert Sterling of the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived to coordinate with State Medical Board investigators, bringing resources and authority necessary to pursue leads across state boundaries. His preliminary assessment concluded that the systematic nature of the disappearances and the involvement of multiple facilities required federal intervention to ensure comprehensive investigation and appropriate prosecution if criminal activity was discovered. Agent Sterling's background investigation into Dr. Blackwood revealed connections to experimental psychiatric research networks that operated with minimal oversight during the 1920s and early 1930s. These research programs had explored controversial treatment methods, including extended isolation, pharmaceutical experimentation, and environmental manipulation techniques that were considered innovative by supporters and ethically questionable by critics. The research community had operated through informal professional associations that shared findings and coordinated activities without formal regulatory approval. Dr. Blackwood's participation in these networks had provided access to alternative treatment philosophies and experimental methodologies. Financial investigation revealed complex funding arrangements that connected private treatment facilities with research institutions and pharmaceutical companies interested in experimental psychiatric interventions. The economic network had provided financial incentives for patient recruitment and treatment outcome documentation while maintaining research secrecy through proprietary protection claims. Federal investigators discovered that several missing patients had characteristics that made them ideal subjects for experimental research, including lack of family advocacy, chronic conditions resistant to conventional treatment, and limited likelihood of external inquiry about their welfare. The patient selection criteria suggested systematic targeting for research purposes. Surveillance of known associates of Dr. Blackwood led investigators to a remote facility in Arkansas that operated under the designation of a private sanitarium, but maintained security measures more consistent with research laboratories than treatment centers. The facility had been established shortly after Dr. Blackwood's departure from state service and employed several former staff members from institutions where patient disappearances had been documented. Federal agents observed activities suggesting ongoing operations despite official records indicating suspended patient admissions. The facility's remote location and enhanced security measures raised suspicions about the nature of treatments being administered. Legal analysis of patient transfer documentation revealed sophisticated forgery techniques that had been used to create legitimate appearances for unauthorized patient movements. Document experts confirmed that official state forms had been professionally reproduced with falsified signatures and administrative approvals that would have passed casual inspection by oversight authorities. The quality of the forgeries indicated access to official documentation and detailed knowledge of approval processes normally restricted to senior administrative personnel. The systematic nature of the document falsification suggested organized criminal activity rather than isolated incidents of misconduct. Interview transcripts from family members of missing patients revealed patterns of communication that suggested coordinated deception designed to prevent immediate investigation into patient welfare. Families had received periodic updates about patient progress that maintained the appearance of ongoing treatment while providing minimal specific information about location or treatment methods. These communications had been professionally written and contained medical terminology that conveyed authority while avoiding details that might enable verification of patient status. The systematic nature of family communications indicated organized efforts to delay discovery of patient disappearances. Psychiatric experts consulted by federal investigators raised serious concerns about the experimental treatment methods described in Dr. Blackwood's research notes and correspondence with private facilities. The isolation techniques and pharmaceutical interventions mentioned in documentation had not received approval from medical oversight authorities and posed significant risks to patient welfare without clear evidence of therapeutic benefit. Professional ethics committees had previously expressed concerns about similar experimental approaches that prioritized research objectives over patient safety. The experimental nature of the treatments suggested that patients may have been used as research subjects without informed consent or appropriate medical supervision. Agent Sterling's preliminary report concluded that the investigation had uncovered evidence of systematic patient exploitation through unauthorized transfer to experimental research programs that operated without proper medical oversight or legal authorization. The complex network of private facilities, research funding, and administrative manipulation had created opportunities for criminal activity that required comprehensive federal investigation to determine the full scope of the conspiracy and locate missing patients. The evidence suggested that vulnerable individuals under state care had been systematically targeted for experimental research that violated medical ethics and federal laws protecting patient rights. The investigation would require extensive resources and coordination between multiple agencies to ensure justice for victims and prevention of future exploitation of vulnerable populations under state care. The federal investigation culminated in the discovery of abandoned research facilities that contained fragmentary records suggesting experimental treatment programs had been conducted on patients transferred from multiple state institutions across the Midwest. Partially destroyed documentation indicated that at least 47 individuals had been subjects in research protocols designed to test pharmaceutical interventions and behavioral modification techniques that had not received approval from medical oversight authorities. The research records contained clinical observations and treatment outcomes that demonstrated systematic experimentation on vulnerable populations without informed consent or appropriate medical supervision. However, the destruction of comprehensive documentation prevented determination of specific patient identities or current whereabouts. Dr. Blackwood's whereabouts remained unknown, despite extensive federal investigation and international cooperation with law enforcement agencies. His professional credentials had been suspended following preliminary findings of the investigation, while criminal charges were prepared, pending his location and arrest. Former associates claimed no knowledge of his current activities or location, while financial records indicated that significant sums had been transferred to foreign accounts shortly before his disappearance from public view. The sophistication of his exit strategy suggested advanced planning and possible assistance from individuals with experience in creating new identities and avoiding law enforcement detection. Several private facilities connected to the experimental treatment network were discovered to have been abandoned suddenly, with equipment and records removed in ways that suggested coordinated evacuation rather than normal business closure. Federal agents found evidence of hasty document destruction and facility sanitization that indicated awareness of impending investigation and systematic efforts to eliminate evidence of unauthorized activities. The timing of the facility closures coincided with Dr. Whitmore's initial discovery of missing patient records, suggesting communication networks that provided advance warning of potential exposure. The coordinated nature of the evacuation efforts demonstrated sophisticated organization among network participants. The fate of missing patients remained undetermined, despite extensive investigation and pursuit of all available leads. Federal authorities located 3 individuals who had been transferred to private facilities but had subsequently been returned to family care following completion of experimental treatment programs. These survivors provided testimony indicating that they had been subjected to pharmaceutical experiments and behavioral modification techniques without their knowledge or consent. Their accounts described institutional environments that emphasized research objectives over patient welfare, with treatment decisions made based on experimental protocols rather than individual medical needs. However, their testimony provided no information about the whereabouts of other missing patients. State medical authorities implemented comprehensive reforms to institutional oversight and patient protection protocols designed to prevent future exploitation of vulnerable populations under government care. New regulations required enhanced documentation of patient transfers, independent oversight of treatment decisions, and mandatory reporting of any experimental research involving institutionalized individuals. The regulatory changes represented significant improvements in patient protection, while acknowledging that existing safeguards had been systematically exploited by individuals with detailed knowledge of institutional vulnerabilities. The reforms would require ongoing vigilance to ensure effective implementation and continued protection of patient rights. Family members of missing patients initiated legal proceedings against state authorities and private facilities seeking compensation for the unauthorized experimentation and exploitation of their relatives. The civil litigation faced significant challenges due to the systematic destruction of evidence and the disappearance of key participants in the experimental network. Legal experts acknowledged that proving specific damages would be difficult without comprehensive documentation of treatment protocols and patient outcomes. The litigation represented efforts to obtain justice for victims while acknowledging the limitations imposed by the sophisticated concealment of criminal activities. Professional medical associations conducted comprehensive reviews of experimental research practices and established enhanced ethical guidelines designed to prevent future exploitation of vulnerable populations in medical research. The investigation had revealed that existing oversight mechanisms had been inadequate to detect or prevent systematic abuse of patients under state care. Professional organizations committed to improved training for medical personnel regarding ethical research practices and enhanced reporting requirements for experimental treatment programs. The medical community acknowledged that professional self-regulation had failed to protect vulnerable patients from exploitation by individuals who violated fundamental principles of medical ethics. The mystery of the missing patients from Ward 7 ultimately remained partially unresolved despite extensive investigation by state and federal authorities. While evidence clearly demonstrated systematic exploitation and unauthorized experimentation, the destruction of comprehensive records and the disappearance of key participants prevented complete determination of patient outcomes. Dr. Whitmore continued his efforts to reform institutional practices while acknowledging that justice for the victims would remain incomplete. The case served as a disturbing reminder of the vulnerability of institutionalized populations and the potential for systematic abuse when oversight mechanisms fail to protect those who cannot advocate for themselves. The investigation had exposed serious flaws in the system designed to care for society's most vulnerable members, while providing only partial answers about the fate of individuals who had disappeared from state protection. If you liked this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel.